I have been dedicated to charity work for 15 years. No matter how chaotic my schedule, I carve out a few days every year. I personally oversee the purchase of massive shipments of brand new winter coats, sturdy boots, and school supplies. I drive them myself into the deepest, most forgotten hollows of the Appalachian hills. Over the years, I have funded the rebuilding of local schools and paid the salaries of teachers out of my own pocket. Eventually, my annual trips into these isolated valleys began to draw volunteers and charitable organizations from all over the country, all of them wanting to join my caravan. This year, our destination was Pine Ridge, a notoriously impoverished mountain town. I stood at the edge of the gravel parking lot near the community center, handing out supplies to the children as they lined up. Before long, a young girl stepped up to the table. She stood out even among the hollow's neglected children. Caked in dry mountain clay, her cheeks hollowed out by hunger, she was little more than a bundle of sharp bones under a threadbare flannel shirt. She kept her head bowed as she took the heavy winter coat I handed her, but she didn't leave the line. She hesitated, her small shoulders tensing, before she whispered in a trembling voice, "Ma'am, could I have a box of pads, too?" I stared into her eyes. The world went dead quiet around us for 2 agonizing seconds. Then, with a sudden, violent jerk, I snatched the coat right out of her hands. "You think you deserve my charity?" I said, my voice cold and sharp. The moment the words left my mouth, the entire lot fell into a suffocating silence. The volunteers froze mid-motion, their hands suspended in the air as they stared at me in absolute shock. To everyone who knew me, Delia Campbell was the darling of national philanthropy. For 15 years, I had built a legacy on rescuing vulnerable, suffering children from the cracks of society. Yet here I was, standing in front of a starving, ragged little girl, spitting venom. The girl stood paralyzed, the blood draining completely from her already pale face. She bit her cracked lower lip so hard it looked ready to bleed, her tiny, dirt-encrusted fingers clawing at the hem of her oversized shirt as she fought back tears. Clyde, the local town commissioner, quickly scrambled forward, his worn face written with panic. "Mrs. Campbell. Please, don't misunderstand," Clyde pleaded, his hands raised in defense. "Gracie isn't a greedy girl. Her life has been nothing but misery." He took a deep breath, trying to shield her. Her mother died not long after giving birth to her baby brother. Her father, Hank, is a hopeless drunk who lives out of a bottle. Hank beats her constantly, drunk or sober. Her body is covered in a map of old and new bruises. Their family is the poorest in the entire valley. Please, in your great heart, don't hold a grudge against a miserable child. Clyde's voice cracked with genuine sorrow. But I acted as if I hadn't heard a single word. My gaze never drifted back to Gracie. To me, she had simply ceased to exist. I reached down, picked up a brand new wool jacket and a set of markers from the table, and handed them to the little boy standing behind her with a warm smile. "Here you go, sweetheart. Make sure you study hard, okay?" I continued passing out the supplies, my movements calm, methodical, and entirely unbothered. Around the lot, the volunteers began to whisper, their hushed voices buzzing like angry hornets. What on earth just happened? Delia has never treated a child like that. That poor girl looks like she's about to collapse. She's starving and abused, and Delia just treated her like trash. How could she be so heartless? Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Is Delia having some kind of breakdown? They leaned into each other, exchanging bewildered glances. No one could rationalize what they had just witnessed. Even Bridget, my assistant of 6 years, stepped closer to me. She kept her head down, her voice a tense whisper near my ear. "Delia, that little girl didn't get any supplies. She looks absolutely desperate. Can't we just give her a coat?" I paused, turning my head slightly to give her a flat, cool look. "Desperate?" I murmured, loud enough for the sound to carry. "There are millions of desperate children in this world, Bridget. Do you think we can save them all?" My words cut through the mountain air, landing squarely on Gracie. She couldn't hold it in any longer. A raw, ragged sob tore from her throat, and she collapsed to the dirt, wrapping her thin arms around my boots. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have asked for the pads," she wailed, her voice thick with terror and humiliation. "I don't want them anymore. I didn't mean to make you mad. I don't even need the school supplies. Just please give me a winter coat. I beg of you." She clung to my legs, stripping herself of every ounce of dignity. "I have a baby brother at home. My dad said, he said if I didn't bring home a winter coat today, he'd beat me to death tonight. Ma'am, he really will kill me. I'm not lying." Her desperate cries echoed off the surrounding hills. The volunteers looked on, their faces twisted with pain and burning sympathy. One of the female volunteers broke down, tears streaming down her face as she rushed forward and pulled Gracie's frail, bony frame into her arms. Delia, please, she's just a child. Give her the coat. Yes, exactly. She's a young girl, asking for basic hygiene products is completely normal. You've spent 15 years doing this. Isn't helping kids like her the entire point of your foundation? The pleas turned into a chorus of condemnation. To everyone present, I was a cold, unfeeling monster. Yet, my expression remained carved in stone. I looked at the crowd, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. These are my supplies, bought with my money. I choose who gets them, and I don't take directions from my volunteers. The bluntness of my response silenced the crowd, leaving them speechless and seething. Bridget stood beside me, staring at the hard profile of my face, her confusion turning into deep disillusionment. Delia, I don't even recognize you, she said, her voice shaking. I've been with you for 6 years. I've never seen you discriminate against anyone. She's a child who asked for help. What did she do to deserve this? I glanced at her. How do you know her misery isn't an act? Bridget froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. An act? Delia, look at her. Look at how thin she is. How could anyone fake that? Anyone can act, Bridget. The words left Bridget entirely speechless, but she was far from convinced. To her, I had become a stranger, someone terrifyingly cold. I pushed down the storm of emotions swirling in my chest. Ignoring the girl's quiet sobbing and the hostile glares of the crowd, I went back to distributing the supplies. The first day of our trip ended in that heavy, suffocating atmosphere. The next morning, the sky was a bruised, dull gray when the second convoy of supply trucks rolled into the Pine Ridge lot. Unlike the day before, these trucks were loaded with heavy sacks of flour, rice, cooking oil, and thick, insulated blankets for the winter. And unlike the day before, Gracie was already there. She was standing at the very front of the line, a solitary, fragile figure in the freezing dawn. She was wearing the same filthy, oversized shirt. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she stood with her weight shifted awkwardly to one side, clearly nursing a leg injury. Clyde walked over to me, letting out a heavy, tired sigh. Word is, when she got home empty-handed yesterday, her daddy nearly beat her to death. She walked back up here in the middle of the night and sat on that cold stone step for hours just to be first in line. I followed Clyde's gaze to her thin, shivering frame. My eyes remained entirely devoid of pity. Once the distribution table was set, I looked at Gracie, who was watching me with wide, hopeful eyes. Without a word, I stepped right past her, reaching out to hand the first blanket to the boy standing second in line. It was a blatant, deliberate snub. The volunteers' collective restraint, stretched thin over the last 24 hours, snapped. A young male volunteer named Jared lunged forward, slamming his palm onto the folding table. The impact rattled the metal frame, sending several bags of rice spilling onto the dirt. Enough, Mrs. Campbell. What the hell is your problem? Jared roared, his face flushed with anger. Look at these kids. You're helping everyone except her. She is the most desperate child in this hollow. Why are you torturing her? Another volunteer stepped up, her eyes red and brimming with tears of disappointment. We traveled hundreds of miles with you because we respected your work. We believed in your heart. But this? This is disgusting. This isn't charity. It's abuse. You're using your power to torment a helpless child who has nobody. Suddenly, a reporter in the crowd stepped forward, thrusting a smartphone screen directly into my face. Mrs. Campbell, why don't you take a look at what the rest of the world thinks of your charity? I looked down at the screen. There, sitting at the very top of the trending topics on social media, were 3 hashtags. Hashtag Delia Campbell bullies child. Hashtag the 2 faces of Delia Campbell. Hashtag Campbell Organics boycott. Someone had recorded a video of me snatching the coat back from Gracie the day before. They had uploaded it to TikTok, and overnight, it had exploded across the internet. Thousands of comments were flying by in real time, each one more venomous than the last. Is this woman insane? If you don't want to give, don't give. Why humiliate a starving kid? Did you notice she smiled at all the boys but turned like ice when the girl stepped up? Internalized misogyny much? I bet her entire 15-year career is a fraud. She's probably a sociopath who does this for tax write-offs. This makes me sick. We need a full audit on her foundation immediately. Watching the digital mob tear my life's work to shreds, Bridget began to pace frantically. Delia. What do we do? The internet is destroying you, she cried, her voice trembling. You have to make a statement. Clarify this. If you don't, everything you've built over the last 15 years is going to burn to the ground. I looked at her panicked face, and to her horror, a small, tired smile touched my lips. Clarify what? I asked quietly. Everything in that video is real. I did snatch the coat. They aren't lying. My apparent indifference was the final straw. 3 of the lead volunteers stepped forward, their faces twisted in disgust. They ripped their official foundation badges off their chests and tore off their volunteer vests, throwing them onto the gravel at my feet. We're done. We are not spending another second helping you build your ego. We joined this foundation to protect the vulnerable, not to watch a billionaire bully a child. You stand there, so high and mighty, and you don't even have the decency to admit you're wrong. We're leaving, Delia. And we are never coming back. One by one, the other volunteers followed suit, stripping off their gear and leaving it in a pile on the ground. The warm, unified team I had spent years building fractured in a matter of minutes. I watched them turn their backs on me. My mouth opened, a sudden urge to scream the truth rising in my throat, but I forced myself to swallow it down. I couldn't speak. Not yet. I needed absolute certainty first. Delia, they're all leaving, Bridget whispered, her voice hollow. Are you really not going to say anything? I can't force them to stay, Bridget. Bridget stared at me, her eyes clouded with profound disappointment. If all of this is true, if you really are this cruel, then I guess I wasted 6 years of my life believing in a lie. I took a deep, steadying breath and met her gaze. Bridget, in your heart, do you honestly believe I am the monster they say I am? Bridget opened her mouth to say no, but her eyes fell to the pile of discarded vests on the dirt, and she looked away. The silence was her answer. Within minutes, the lot was empty, save for the scattered supplies, a pile of volunteer vests, and a group of terrified, whispering locals. Clyde stood to the side, wringing his calloused hands, his face pale. He was terrified that in my anger, I would pack up the trucks, cancel our funding, and leave Pine Ridge to freeze. Gracie, too, seemed frightened by the chaos. She trembled, her eyes wide as she looked at me. I'm sorry, ma'am. It's all my fault. Please don't fight with the others. I don't need anything, I'll go. Seeing her like this, Bridget snapped. She stepped past me, marched over to the supply table, and picked up a heavy winter coat, a sack of flour, and a bottle of cooking oil. She shoved them into Gracie's arms. Take it, Bridget said fiercely. And go home. I watched the exchange but did not move to stop her. Instead, I turned to Clyde, my voice calm and steady. Don't worry, Clyde. Every cent of the funding I promised Pine Ridge will be delivered. I don't break my contracts. Clyde let out a long, shuddering breath, his shoulders sagging with relief as he muttered his thanks. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my head of PR. Angry mobs were flooding our corporate accounts, spamming our pages with boycotts. Sales for Campbell Organics had plummeted off a cliff in a matter of hours. Our retail partners were already sending termination notices for our distribution contracts, threatening massive lawsuits for brand damage. By evening, my father, who had been frail for years, heard the news. The stress triggered a massive stroke, and he was rushed to the ICU. Then came the calls from my husband, Matthew. Delia. You have to make a public statement. Apologize, do whatever it takes. The company is going to collapse. The world was spinning out of control. Everyone was screaming at me to bow my head, to beg for forgiveness. But I stayed in my motel room near the hollow, waiting for the one thing that mattered. On the 4th day, the storm reached its peak. A swarm of independent journalists and local news reporters descended on Pine Ridge, their cameras pointed at Gracie's front door. They interviewed her in the dirt yard of her shack, capturing her small, shivering frame against the backdrop of rural poverty. Gracie wept on camera, her voice cracking as she described her daily struggle. Sweetie, one reporter asked gently, leaning in with a microphone, is it true that the rich lady from the city bullied you? Gracie immediately shook her head, wiping her nose with her sleeve. No, no. Mrs. Campbell is a good lady. It's my fault. I was greedy. I shouldn't have asked for things I didn't deserve. I made her mad. Her attempts to defend her bully only made the public more furious. The internet exploded with righteous indignation. And then, my phone buzzed. It was Matthew again, his voice tight with raw panic. Delia, it's bad. Someone leaked Toby's school address online. My heart stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice. What? They're posting online that if you don't make a public, kneeling apology within 24 hours, they're going to pay Toby a visit at school. Delia, you need to get back here. I had remained calm through the destruction of my reputation, the loss of my company, and the betrayal of my staff. But the moment they threatened my son, a primal, white-hot rage flared in my chest. I'm driving back now, I said. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the motel. But when I reached my SUV, I found the exit blocked. A crowd of reporters and local activists had tracked me down. They swarmed the vehicle, blocking my path, their cameras flashing against my windshield. "She's trying to run," someone shouted. "Are you scared now, Delia? Why did you bully that little girl? Give us an explanation. You can't just leave after what you did." Lenses were pressed against my side windows, capturing my pale, furious face. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, and stepped out. "You want an explanation?" I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and slipped a small, worn photograph from the back of the case. I held it up, facing the lenses of the cameras. "This is my explanation." The crowd fell instantly silent. The reporters squinted, and the cameras zoomed in on the small, faded piece of paper. And as the image registered, the anger in the crowd evaporated, replaced by a sudden, chilling shock. The silence that settled over the motel parking lot was not the stunned quiet of a crowd watching a fallen icon. It was something heavier, colder, the absolute stillness of a trap springing shut. The reporters blinked against the glare of their own ring lights. Lenses auto-focused with quiet, rhythmic clicks, capturing the image in my hand. It was not a family portrait. It was a high-resolution, side-by-side forensic photo set, printed on heavy matte stock. On the left was a police mugshot from Harlan County, Kentucky, dated 9 years ago. It showed a small, gaunt female face with prominent cheekbones and a distinct, crescent-shaped scar running through her left eyebrow. The age listed at the bottom was 14. On the right was a zoomed-in, high-contrast frame taken 3 days ago right here in Pine Ridge, a crop from the viral TikTok video that had burned my life to the ground. The child standing in the dirt lot, begging for winter boots. The same cheekbones. The same hollow, haunted eyes. The exact same crescent scar. Hidden beneath a smeared layer of dark mountain clay. "Her name isn't Gracie," I said. My voice was low, carrying effortlessly through the crisp, mountain air. "Her name is Lila Mae Stroud. She was born in 1998 in Harlan County. She is 26 years old." A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed off the metal sides of the news vans. "She suffers from severe panhypopaturism," I continued, stepping closer to the nearest camera, holding the paper steady so the high-definition lens could lock onto every word printed on the medical state record attached to the back. "A rare endocrine failure resulting from extreme, chronic childhood starvation. Inflicted by her biological uncle. It permanently halted her physical growth. When she was 11 years old. She weighs 62 pounds. She has no secondary sexual characteristics. She looks 10, she sounds 10, and her bones have the density of wet chalk." The lead reporter from the regional news affiliate, a young man whose face had been red with moral outrage 30 seconds ago, leaned forward, his eyes darting between the photo and my face. "Mrs. Campbell, even if that's true, why snatch the coat? Why talk to her like that?" "Because Lila Stroud isn't a victim sitting on the steps of Pine Ridge," I said. My tone as hard as flint. "She is a professional shill. For 12 years, she has been moved from hollow to hollow across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee by a criminal syndicate run by her father, Hank Stroud, and your beloved town commissioner, Clyde Vance." I let the name hang in the air like smoke. Every 3 or 4 years, when a major private charity announces a multi-million-dollar relief initiative in a rural district, Clyde clears the books. Hank brings Lila in. They park her at the front of the line. She asks for something specific, something designed to provoke a reaction or test the mark. In 2018, in Perry County, it was insulin for a non-existent sister. In 2021, in Buchanan, it was a Bible for her dead mother. Here, it was sanitary pads, a request specifically chosen because their advance intel told them I had funded a menstrual health initiative in South America last year. The reporter's microphone wobbled in his grip. "A test? A bait," I corrected. If I had given her the supplies, wept for her, and written a check to Clyde's local municipal foundation, like the baseline protocol dictates, they would have siphoned 60% of the aid into off-grid shell accounts within 48 hours, just as they did to the Reynolds Foundation in 2019 and the Appalachian Care Trust in 2022. Both of those organizations were bled dry and driven into bankruptcy by public corruption investigations after the funds vanished. I took a step forward, forcing the circle of journalists back. When she asked for the pads, she used a phrase, "Could I have a box of pads?" 2. That was the exact phrase coded into an FBI bulletin issued 3 weeks ago regarding an ongoing human trafficking and charity fraud enterprise operating out of the abandoned coal seams behind Pine Ridge. I turned my head, looking directly into the camera lens of the reporter whose live stream was currently feeding 30,000 people. "I didn't snatch the coat because I was heartless," I said, my eyes narrowing. "I snatched the coat because if I had given aid to an active operative of a federal target on live camera, Clyde Vance's local lookouts would have known the trap was dry and cleared out the facility in the mountains where they keep 6 actual children, real runaways, real victims, who are currently being used to generate forged medical records and tax write-offs for Clyde's network." The silence returned, but this time it was suffocating. My silence over the last 4 days, I whispered, was not shame. It was the 72 hours required for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Kentucky State Police to execute search warrants on 9 properties owned by Clyde Vance across 3 county lines without tipping off his spotters. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The screen lit up with a secure text. Message received 40 seconds ago, package secured. Clyde in custody. Recovery team at the mine. I looked up at the slack-jawed reporters. "Now," I said, stepping past them toward my SUV, "if you'll excuse me, I have a company to save, a husband to calm down, and a son to protect." The drive back to my home base in Lexington was 6 hours through blinding mountain rain, but I didn't feel the fatigue. The adrenaline that had kept my blood cold for 15 years was finally beginning to curdle into something sour and heavy. When you spend 15 years giving away millions of dollars, people assume you are soft. They assume that because you care about bruised children and roofless schools, your mind is full of warm light and sweet intentions. They don't realize that to survive in the deep hollows, where law enforcement is 3 counties away and local politics are governed by blood, oxycodone, and ancient grudges, you have to be harder than the iron or buried under the dirt. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. It was Bridget. Her voice came through the speakers crackling with static, ruined by crying. "Delia. Delia, oh God. I just saw the press conference from the state police in Pikeville. They pulled 4 children out of an old processing shaft behind the sawmill. They found the ledger. Clyde's bank records, everything. You said." I kept my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, watching the windshield wipers sweep red mountain mud across the glass. "I know, Bridget. Delia, I left my vest in the gravel," she sobbed. "I called you a monster. I told you I wasted 6 years of my life. You did your job," I said, my voice even. "If you had acted like you were in on it." Clyde's brother, who was standing behind the distribution table with a loaded .38 in his jacket pocket, would have known something was wrong. "You were genuinely disgusted with me. That genuine disgust is the only reason they didn't clear the mine on Tuesday night. You let us hate you," she whispered. "You let the whole country hate you. Public opinion is cheap, Bridget. It turns like the wind. Children pulled out of a dark shaft don't get a second chance if you slip up to save your own ego." I paused, listening to the rain heavy on the roof. "Go back to the hotel. Tell Jared and the rest of the crew to pick up their vests from the mud. The second truck of real winter supplies needs to be unloaded at the county line by dawn. The children who actually live in Pine Ridge still need boots. Are you coming back?" "No," I said, looking at the dash clock. "I have to handle my family." I hung up before she could offer an apology I didn't have the energy to accept. Apologies in this line of work were like cheap bandages on a compound fracture. They made the person applying them feel better, but they didn't fix the bone. When I pulled into the driveway of our estate outside Lexington at 2 a.m., the high-security perimeter gates were open. 2 dark sedans with unmarked government plates were parked near the front portico. I stepped out of the SUV, my boots crunching on the wet river limestone. The front door opened before I reached the steps, and Matthew came out into the cold night air. He looked 10 years older than he had 4 days ago. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his hair a chaotic mess from hours of running his fingers through it. He stood on the porch, watching me walk up the stone steps, his expression a mix of profound relief and deep, agonizing shame. "Delia," he breathed, reaching out his hands. I didn't take them. I walked past him into the foyer, peeling off my wet coat and hanging it on the brass rack by the door. "How is my father?" I asked, looking toward the hallway that led to the study. He's stabilized," Matthew said, his voice dropping to an anxious murmur. As he followed me. The doctors at UK Health said the stroke was lacunar, minor motor impairment on his left side, but his mind is intact. He watched the FBI press conference an hour ago from his hospital bed. "Delia," he wept. "He tried to say your name. And Toby? He's asleep upstairs." We had 2 private security guards at the school gates all afternoon until the local sheriff's department confirmed the threat origin was traced back to an IP address owned by Hank Stroud's cousin in Hazard. Matthew took a step toward me, his face twisted with pain. "Delia, why didn't you tell me? Why couldn't you give me even a hint? I thought you had lost your mind up there." I was watching the stock price fall 40%. In 12 hours, I was getting calls from our board members wanting to strip you of the CEO title. I turned around slowly, fixing him with the same flat, stone-cold stare I had given Bridget in the gravel parking lot. "If I had told you," I said softly, "you would have called our corporate legal team. Our legal team would have filed an emergency injunction or contacted the State Attorney General's Civil Division. The State Attorney General's office in this state leaks like a wicker basket. Clyde Vance would have received a phone call 30 minutes later. The children in that mine shaft would have been moved across state lines into an untraceable network, and Lila Stroud would have been buried in a shallow trench behind the sawmill to close the loop." Matthew swallowed hard. "I'm your husband, Delia. And I am the person who carries the weight of what happens when we go into those hills," I replied, my voice dropping an octave, razor sharp. "You manage the logistics from a glass tower in Lexington, Matthew. You look at spreadsheets, distribution maps, and tax incentives. I look into the eyes of the people who live in the dark. I know what they are capable of because I grew up 40 miles from where Clyde Vance was born." He flinched. He always forgot that part. "To the national media, to our corporate sponsors, and to the high society donors who attended our annual galas in Louisville, I was Delia Campbell, the elegant, polished heiress to the Campbell Organics agricultural empire. They forgot that before my father bought his first 300 acres of lowland limestone soil and built a multi-million-dollar organic food empire. His name was Arthur Conley, a broke diesel mechanic from a coal camp in Harlan County who changed his name so banks would give him a loan. I knew the mountain. I knew how it ate people. And I knew that when the mountain decided to eat a child, it didn't use teeth, it used quiet, respectable men like Clyde Vance who wore polyester suits and ran the local chamber of commerce." "Get some sleep, Matthew," I said, turning toward the stairs. "Tomorrow morning. The board meets at 8. I have 3 dismissals to sign, 2 lawsuits to file against the networks that broadcast unverified slander, and a foundation to restructure." "Delia," he whispered, his hand catching the banister behind me. "Are we going to be okay?" I paused on the 4th step, looking down at him through the dim light of the crystal chandelier. "We will survive, Matthew," I said. "We always do. But don't ever ask me to apologize for doing what was necessary to cut out a rot." At 7:30 a.m. the following morning, the headquarters of Campbell Organics was surrounded by a wall of television trucks, but the atmosphere inside the executive boardroom on the top floor was as quiet as a chapel. The 11 members of the board sat around the polished mahogany table. 3 of them, the ones who had sent formal emails demanding my immediate resignation as CEO at 4 p.m. the previous day, refused to meet my eyes. I sat at the head of the table. In front of me lay 3 simple manila folders. "Good morning," I said, placing my hands flat on the wood. "I assume you have all reviewed the statement released by the Department of Justice at 5 a.m. No one spoke. Arthur Pendleton, an elder partner in a major Louisville investment firm who had held a seat on our board for 8 years, cleared his throat nervously. "Delia, obviously, the context has shifted dramatically. The bravery you showed in assisting the federal authorities. Save it, Arthur," I cut in, my voice icy and precise. "Yesterday at 4:15 p.m. while my father was in the intensive care unit and my son was under federal protective detail, you signed a draft press release authorizing the board to strip me of operational control and freeze my personal equity units. Pendleton's face turned gray. We were facing total brand destruction. The major retail chains were threatening to cancel our distribution agreements. The distribution agreements, I said, opening the first folder, were protected by key man operational clauses that gave the company 90 days to respond to any public relations event before breach of contract could be declared. You knew that. But you panicked. Or, more accurately, you saw an opportunity to force a buyout of my family's voting shares while the stock was artificially depressed. I slid the folder across the table toward him. That is a formal notice of shareholder derivative action for breach of fiduciary duty. You are off the board as of 9 o'clock this morning. Your firm's equity options have been repurchased at yesterday's closing price under the emergency misconduct provisions of Section 4 of our charter. Pendleton stared at the document, his fingers trembling. You can't do this. The shareholders. I own 52% of the voting stock, Arthur. My father owns another 20. Between us, you don't even have enough weight to choose the catering for the annual meeting. I turned my gaze to the two men sitting next to him. Folders 2 and 3 are for you gentlemen. You have 30 minutes to clear your offices before security escorts you from the building. One of the directors, a younger private equity manager named Davies, slammed his palm on the table. This is insane. You played a high-stakes game of chicken with a criminal ring using the company's reputation as collateral. You almost destroyed a $3 billion brand. I protected the integrity of the work this company was built on, I said, standing up. This company was not founded to be a tax shield for rich men who get nervous when Twitter gets loud. It was founded to bring capital into places that society discarded. If you don't understand the difference between a real crisis and a temporary media storm, you don't belong in this room. I looked at the remaining 8 board members. They sat frozen, terrified, but sharp enough to know that the tide had turned completely. The morning news cycle was already running headlines that made me look like an untouchable, brilliant, intelligence-style hero who had taken down a deep-rooted corruption ring single-handedly. The stock had opened up 12% in pre-market trading. The meeting is adjourned, I said. I have a hospital to visit. The ICU at UK Health was quiet, save for the rhythmic, soothing beep of the heart monitors. My father lay in the center of the bed, his head propped up by white pillows. The left side of his face was slightly slack, a cruel reminder of the pressure his brain had endured over the last 48 hours, but his right eye was clear, sharp, and fierce. I pulled a vinyl chair close to the bed and sat down, taking his right hand in mine. His grip was surprisingly strong, the hard, calloused hand of an old mechanic that 50 years of wealth had never quite softened. You damn fool, he rasped, the words coming slow and thick from his throat, his vocal cords struggling against the residual effects of the stroke. A small smile touched the corner of my lips. Good to hear your voice too, Dad. They had guns, Delia, he grunted, his chest heaving with the effort. Clyde Vance. I knew his father, bad blood, cold men. I had 4 armed federal marshals sitting in the civilian surveillance van. 60 yards away in the trees, Dad, I said gently, leaning closer. I wasn't alone. You were alone, he corrected, his eye burning with an intensity that made me pull back slightly. On that camera, in the dirt, you let them call you a devil. You stood there, took it. It was the only way to make Hank and Clyde feel safe, I said. If I had acted professional, if I had acted cautious, Clyde would have known I was playing a hand. But when I acted like a spoiled, arrogant billionaire who was furious that a ragged kid ruined her photo op. He laughed. The wiretap caught him 40 minutes later on the phone with his handler in Louisville. He said, the rich bitch swallowed it whole. She's throwing a fit and leaving. Clear the hall tonight. That phone call was the primary evidence the federal judge needed to sign the wire warrant for the mine. My father closed his eye for a long moment, letting out a breath that sounded like dry leaves rustling in an alleyway. Lila, he murmured. The girl. She's in federal custody at a medical facility in Lexington, I said, my tone flattening. Her endocrine system is wrecked. She spent 15 years being dosed with thyroid blockers and corticosteroids by Hank to keep her small and sick so she could keep playing the part. The federal prosecutor is looking at extortion charges against her, but I've already instructed our legal team to file an amicus brief. She was 8 years old when Hank took her out of school. She's a victim, even if she knew how to play the game. My father turned his head slowly toward the window, looking out over the gray sky of Lexington. You, going back, he asked. To Pine Ridge? I paused, looking down at my hands. Not today. The state relief teams are there now. The media is all over it. If I go back now, it becomes a circus. Go back, he growled, his hand tightening on mine until my knuckles turned white. Don't let them take the valley from you, Delia. You build the school, you pay the teachers, you stay. Dad. They want you to run away, he rasped, his breath catching in his throat as he pushed through the physical pain to get the words out. The people in those hollows, they aren't Clyde Vance. They aren't Hank Stroud. They are us. They are stuck in the mud, waiting for somebody who isn't scared of the dark. I looked at him for a long, silent moment. The old man who had taught me how to adjust a carburetor on a tractor before I was 10 years old, the man who had worked 18-hour days in the grease and dust so I could go to boarding school in Connecticut, the man who had never let me forget where the grease came from. All right, I whispered. I'll go back. 2 weeks later, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a hard, crisp winter frost that turned the mud of Pine Ridge into white, jagged glass. The news vans were gone. The viral hashtags had died out, replaced by the next 48-hour outrage cycle in Washington. The gravel parking lot near the community center was quiet, save for 2 gray supply trucks parked near the entrance. There were no cameras today. No press team, no corporate banners, no high society volunteers from Louisville looking for resume material. Just me, Bridget, and Jared. Jared stood by the open tailgate of the lead truck, unloading a crate of heavy steel-toed work boots. He looked tired, his hands raw from the cold, but when he saw my SUV pull up, he stopped, wiped his nose on his sleeve, and gave me a silent, respectful nod. Bridget stepped out of the community center office, holding a clipboard. She had lost weight over the last 14 days, the stress of the national storm still visible in the shadows under her eyes, but her posture was straight, her chin set. The local school board met this morning, she said as I walked up to the table. They approved the structural plans for the new wing. The funding you authorized went straight into an escrow account overseen by the State Department of Education. No local handles the cash. Good, I said, pulling on my heavy leather work gloves. Where are the children? In the hall, she said, pointing toward the double wooden doors of the center. They're waiting. They were a little scared at first, after everything with the police and the raid on the mine. But Clyde's gone. His deputies were suspended by the state governor yesterday. The town feels lighter. I walked toward the wooden doors, pushing them open. The hall was filled with 50 children from the deepest hollows around Pine Ridge, real children, ragged, thin, their faces red from the mountain frost, but their eyes clear and wide. They sat on folding chairs, surrounded by their mothers and grandmothers, women with hands worn down by a lifetime of hard labor, wearing thin coats that had seen 20 winters. When I stepped into the room, a low hush fell over the crowd. A woman in the third row, an elder with silver hair wrapped in a faded wool shawl, whose grandson I had paid to send to an eye specialist in Cincinnati 3 years ago, stood up slowly. She didn't clap. She didn't cheer. She simply stepped out into the center aisle, walked over to me, and held out a small, glass mason jar filled with dark mountain honey. Mrs. Campbell, the old woman said, her voice dry and rasping like wind through corn husks. We heard what you did. We heard what you suffered for us on that television. I looked down at the jar, then up into her lined, weathered face. I didn't do it for praise, Mrs. Mullins, I said quietly. We know why you did it, she replied, pressing the cold glass jar into my gloved hands. You did it because you knew if you acted soft, Clyde would have buried those poor children under the mountain and blamed the winter. You acted like iron so the hammer would hit the anvil, not the glass. She reached out, her fingers catching my arm, her grip surprisingly firm. This valley has seen 1,000 rich folks come through with cameras and big words, Mrs. Campbell, she whispered. They give us a box of fruit, take their pictures, and run when the mud gets on their shoes. You took the mud. You took the filth of the whole world on your name, and you stayed until the work was done. She turned back to the room, nodding toward the children. Now, she said, her voice rising to carry across the hall, come on up here. Kids. Get your coats. Mrs. Campbell bought the good ones this year. I stood there in the chilly, pine-scented air of the community hall, holding the small jar of honey. The line began to form. A real 10-year-old boy stepped up first, his feet sticking out of shoes that were split at the seams. He looked up at me, his eyes bright, his nose running from the cold. I reached into the box on the table, pulled out a thick, down-filled winter coat, lined with waterproof nylon, and held it out to him. Here you go, sweetheart, I said, a real, warm smile finally reaching my eyes. Make sure you study hard, okay? He took the coat, hugged it tightly to his chest like it was made of gold, and ran back to his mother. Outside, the mountain sun was finally breaking through the dense gray clouds, casting a sharp, brilliant light over the hollows, a light that reached even the deepest cracks in the earth, where the dark had held sway for far too long.